Hello everyone, my name is Yuting. I'm an MAt student in the Language and Literacies Education program. Today I'm going to give a presentation on a topic revolving around the attitudes and ideologies about native and non-native English-speaking teachers in English language teaching. As a prospective EFL teacher, I think it's very important for me to recognize the challenges faced by non-native teachers and the things we can offer to students before entering into the profession. So let's get started. My presentation title is Native Speakerism, Re-examining Teacher Identity and Professional Legitimacy in ELT. There are four major goals in my presentation. I will attempt to demystify native speakerism by analyzing strengths and weaknesses of native and non-native English-speaking teachers from a more balanced perspective. And I will review the issues caused by native speakerism in the English language teaching field. Also, I will look at the challenges faced by these two groups before we move on to the final step of providing solutions to tackle and mediate the negative impacts brought by native speakerism. And in my presentation, I will use nests as native English-speaking teachers and non-nests as non-native English-speaking teachers. Before anything, let's clarify one thing first. Who is a native speaker? How do we differentiate native speakers from non-native speakers? So there are two major arguments. One assumption is that native speakers inherit a superior linguistic proficiency through birth. So being a native speaker in this sense indicates origin in a country or environment where English is spoken as the first language. The other view is that proficiency doesn't come from birth. Instead, it comes from education and experience. And people can become native speakers at different times in life. So this definition means that someone can become a native speaker through gaining knowledge about the language, traditions, and cultures, or interacting in an English-speaking environment. But identifying a person as a native speaker or non-native speaker is not as clear-cut as one imagines. If we think about the many variables that can affect this binary division, the dichotomy between native speakers and non-native speakers is very problematic. A good example is that if someone immigrated to Canada at a very young age and achieves native speaker fluency later, but this person has a stronger cultural affiliation or attachment to his or her native culture, the person may not necessarily identify him or herself as a native English speaker. Another example is few of us would probably disagree that a child who was born and raised in a bilingual family can have two native languages if the parents both speak to the child in their mother tongue. And also, since English has become the dominant language that is now being widely used around the world, the amount of non-native speakers outnumbers native speakers by almost 2 times. And there are so many varieties of English. So English doesn't belong to any particular group. If it's not owned by anyone, then how can we identify its ownership? Just because someone doesn't speak in the same way as a British or American doesn't mean he or she is not a native speaker. So the native and non-native label is too simplistic, and it doesn't really capture all the complexities associated with being a language user. As people can have multiple social identities, and these identities are dynamic and highly context dependent. They are always changing as we interact with the environment and gain new experiences. So some scholars have proposed other terms such as expert speaker, proficient user to replace the native and non-native labels. Nonetheless, some researchers still believe that there are distinguished differences between the two groups. Magis, for example, he called native and non-native speakers as two different species. He claims that non-native speakers can never achieve native speakers' competence, and probably they should never try, because sooner or later they will hit a glass wall that stops them from becoming a real native speaker. However, he says that non-native speakers can work toward near native speaker fluency. So perhaps we can think of native speakers and non-native speakers as more of a continuum that accounts for all the possibilities between the two and status. And English speakers can stand on any point along this continuum. Considering that there are so many non-native speakers, it's estimated that 80% of the English teachers around the world will be non-native English speakers. However, despite the strong presence of non-native English-speaking teachers, when asked about who are the better English teachers, native speakers or non-native speakers, many people still tend to believe that nests are more competent in linguistic and pedagogical knowledge than non-nests. And this is what's called native speakerism or native speaker fallacy. It's a pervasive belief that the ideal teacher of English is a native speaker. So are nests really better than non-nests? If it's true, then in what aspects do they outperform non-native teachers? And what about non-nests? What's the advantage of being a non-native English-speaking teacher? So next, I will look at the strengths of these two groups. Let's start with the nests first. The most common perceived advantage of learning from nests is their great linguistic competence. They are confident English users and have good accent and pronunciation. They can help learners raise pragmatic awareness by showing students how to use language appropriately in a given context. And they have complete innate competence in the target language. They may not be able to explain grammatical points well, but they can tell something doesn't sound right from intuition. Another distinguished advantage is that they have rich cultural knowledge. So nests usually have lived in English-speaking countries before and may even have a wider exposure of multiple cultures. So they can explain English culture to students without further preparation. And their teaching behavior is different than that of non-nests. As we all know that teaching styles vary from one country to another. So the way in which how nests were taught in their previous learning experience will affect the way they behave in the classroom. Oftentimes, nests will focus on cultivating students' communicative skills by motivating students to speak real and authentic English. And nests have also been reported for being good at creating a more interesting and relaxing atmosphere in the classroom. And what about non-nests? To begin, they are language learners themselves, so they usually have in-depth language knowledge. They can explain how language works in a way that's easier and probably clearer for students to understand. And they are aware of students' needs. Non-nests have and are still going through the process of learning language. They can better relate to or resonate with the difficulties that students are experiencing, so they can better tailor their lessons according to students' needs. And if the teacher comes from the same culture and speaks the mother tongue of the students, the teacher will have experiences in the same educational system. So students may feel easier to communicate with the non-nest if they have a shared cultural background. And students may even feel less stressful asking questions, because in this case, both the student and the teacher have the same interaction protocols for negotiating student and teacher interaction. And finally, and very importantly, non-nests can be a very successful learner model, because non-nests can demonstrate to their students what can be accomplished as a non-native speaker, and students may take them as a model in the learning. But what do students think of non-native and native teachers? What are their perceptions? So many studies show that students don't necessarily have a stronger preference for nests, and in some circumstances, they even favor non-nests over nests. For example, they don't always prefer a native speaker accent. Accent is less of a concern as long as the speech is intelligible. And students tend to have a more positive attitude as they spend longer time with nests at school. And also, they appreciate that non-nests can resort to their first language to explain complex language problems. So apparently a shared L1 can facilitate instruction and comprehension. Some students also believe that non-nests are more appropriate for teaching beginning level students, because low-level students may have difficulties understanding native speaker speech. So a teacher's effectiveness is not based on whether he or she is a native speaker or not. Many factors like professional training, cultural background, charisma, and personality, all of these things play a significant role in affecting how successful a teacher would be. So this means that a well-qualified non-nest can be as good as a nest. Despite the fact that a lot of non-nests have received professional training, the authority of nests is still accepted as the norm. Non-nests are considered as second-rate when compared with native counterparts. And this misconception has brought inequities to the English language teaching field. So the first direct influence is that It has in fact deprofessionalized ELT by prioritizing origin over skills. If you look on the internet, thousands of language teaching jobs specify that only native speakers will be considered. And people who don't have adequate qualifications are gaining entry into the profession simply because they are the so-called native speakers. And many institutions recruit native speakers only as a response to the perceived market demand. Instead of fully capitalizing on their capacities, native speakers are hired as a sales icon. And the prejudice has caused employment discrimination against non-nests. Many recruiters only hire teachers who hold a passport from an English-speaking or inner circle countries. So this requirement has definitely screened out many qualified non-nests in the initial stage of job application. And appearance is a marketable asset in certain situations. People who are born in inner circle countries also face similar rejections just because they don't have a native-like appearance. The discrimination in the job market has inevitably led to imbalanced pay between native and non-native teachers. Many non-nests are being underpaid, and in some studies, native teachers are reported earning 3 times as much as non-nests. Since non-nests have long been considered as less qualified, this in turn has caused a lack of self-confidence among them. Some feel that they don't meet the expectations of an ideal teacher, and some feel guilty for not being able to offer a detailed answer to students. So these self-doubts have made them question their legitimacy as teachers and users of English as a result. Before we move any further to think up ways to tackle the problem, let's look at the challenges faced by these two groups. As for non-nests, especially those who teach in an ESL context, are often complained for not having a fluent command of English. Compared with native teachers, they do relatively less well in every aspect of language performance. And local EFL teachers are usually blamed for the same thing. Because of the insufficient language competence, non-nests are usually very self-conscious about the opinions from their students, peers, and administrators. And this can be a constant source of stress, which in turn will affect their teaching performance. And the third is that they lack cultural knowledge. Since many non-nests mostly live in their home countries and have never studied overseas, they don't have as much cultural knowledge as native speakers do. So they may not be able to present accurate information to students or need longer time to prepare for classes. They also lack context awareness. So many students in the ESL context come from minority groups and speak different languages. If the teacher lacks the knowledge of their cultures and discourses, the teacher might misinterpret students' needs and abilities. And their instructional methods may not be compatible with students' community norms. But I think this applies to both native and non-native groups. It doesn't mean that native teachers know better about minority students' cultures and needs. And the last one is that teacher education has somehow failed to offer adequate training for non-native teacher candidates. Many training programs like TESOL don't always have courses that accommodate non-nests needs. So non-native candidates are ill-prepared for either teaching in their home countries or teaching in the ESL setting. And this can sound very abrasive, but some programs don't even allow non-nests to participate in practicum because of their less satisfying performance. So non-native speakers lack practical training opportunities that are essential to their professional development. For native teachers, first of all, they have innate knowledge about the language, but it doesn't mean that they are proficient in all skills. So according to the literature and from my own experience, native English-speaking teachers are not very good at explaining how and why the language works. And the lack of knowledge in language grammar means that nests more often than not cannot meet the expectations from students, because students expect that an English expert can give an accurate answer to the questions they ask. And native teachers also lack cultural adaptability. This means that native teachers cannot adapt their teaching practices to local conditions. Things that they take for granted, for example, communicative approach is used as an effective English teaching and learning method in Western countries, but it might not be appropriate in Eastern societies like China has the face culture. So Chinese students may not feel very comfortable with the potentially face-threatening classroom activities such as giving presentations in the class, and they may feel a loss of face if they couldn't speak fluently or can't answer questions from their peers or the teacher. So in this case, communicative methods might be better for students who want to live and study abroad, but not for other domestic EFL learners. And also, for those who have never taught in an Eastern culture may find it difficult dealing with the lack of response in the classroom. There can also be administrative problems, because how decisions are made differs from one country to another. And sometimes it may seem undiagrammatic to native speaker teachers. So this can be a source of frustration if the administration style is different from the native speaker's home country. So what can we do to mediate, if not resolve, the problems brought by native speakerism in English language teaching? First of all, instead of avoiding the problem or considering this topic as politically incorrect, these challenges need to be addressed more often and explicitly in teacher education programs, so practitioners can better reflect on the diversity of English and its users. And hopefully, for those who enter the profession, will have a broader view and can move beyond native and non-native labels to act in ways that endorse equity. Second, we need to sensitize both groups to their strengths and weaknesses so that they can make progress within their constraints. For nests, they should strive to improve their knowledge of the English language, and they can even try to learn the foreign language of the host country to counterbalance their weaknesses. And for non-nests, they should continuously improve their English proficiencies and concentrate on finding their strengths in order to contribute with their language learning experiences, and multicultural backgrounds. Third, both groups need to raise their local socio-cultural awareness. Nests should see themselves as learners rather than experts, and it's important to learn the local knowledge and adapt their teaching practices and interpersonal style to align with the particular classroom demands. For non-nests, understanding the cultures and discourses of immigrant students is a very important skill. And I think both groups can try to learn students' first language so that they can better understand students' learning difficulties. In a word, both nests and non-nests need to become familiar with the discourse and cultures of the schools and communities in which they work. Moving on, teacher training programs can also help non-nests become effective language teacher. For example, there can be courses especially designed for non-nests to improve their spoken and written English. And they can support student teachers to gain teaching experience by referring them to on-campus employment or volunteer positions. And these opportunities can help non-nests practice authentic and real-life English and gain confidence in their language and teaching skills. And educational administrators need to be conscious of the native speaker fallacy because they are the ones who ultimately offer teachers the job. Being proficient in English alone isn't sufficient for a teaching position. A qualified teacher should also demonstrate teaching competency. That is, the ability to explain the language in ways that students can understand and being able to handle the classroom effectively. Other qualities such as resilience and composure, emotional stability, all of this determine whether a teacher is good or not. So we should shift our focus to the importance of being professional and consider students' attitudes before rushing to employ native English-speaking teachers. And next, we should conduct more research on this topic. These studies will help us understand the effect that the labels have on classroom teaching, on teachers' self-perception, as well as the effects on students. Last, we should emphasize cooperation and mutual help between nests and non-nests. Collaboration is very important because both groups have important roles to play. In an ideal situation, there should be a balance of native teachers and non-native teachers. And schools should provide more opportunities for them to work collaboratively on group projects so that they can use their strengths and skills to the fullest. So, to finalize my presentation, I want to highlight the contributions that non-nests make in promoting English as an international language. With the ever-growing use of English around the globe, the native and non-native labels are becoming increasingly problematic. In a postmodern world where different languages and cultures are in frequent contact, speakers of different varieties of English will communicate and interact together more often than before. So exposing students to multiple accents and cultures can only be beneficial to them. We do need to move beyond the native and non-native labels and teach students intercultural communicative competence so that they can navigate and cope with issues in both local and international contexts. So I've also attached the reference lists at the end of my slide. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.